President, I rise to speak about a matter of extraordinary importance to the future of American democracy and, in fact, democracies all over the world. At the Helsinki summit on Monday, President Trump embarrassed our country, undermined American values, and openly sided with Russia's authoritarian leader, Vladimir Putin, against the U.S. intelligence community's unanimous assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election. Senator John McCain is right when he said it was, and I quote, one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. The damage inflicted by President Trump's naivete, egotism, false equivalence, and sympathy for autocrats is difficult to calculate. But it is clear that the summit in Helsinki was a tragic mistake, end quote. That's not Bernie Sanders talking. That is former Republican presidential candidate, Senator John McCain. On Tuesday, after a strong international backlash, Trump, in a bizarre statement, claimed that he misspoke and, of course, blamed the media for reporting what he said. Even then, he could not help but suggest that the electoral interference, quote, could be other people also, end quote, and not just Russia. And then in an interview last night, Trump changed his answer yet again and acknowledged in the meekest way possible that, yes, Russia meddled in our election, and as the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin is responsible. Well, this is a step forward, but it is not remotely sufficient. And who knows what tweet the president will release tomorrow. He seems to come up with a new response every few hours. Mr. President, today we face an unprecedented situation of a president who, for whatever reason, refuses to acknowledge the full scope of the threat to American democracy. Either he really doesn't understand what is happening, and that's possible, or he is under Russian influence because of compromising information they may have on him, or because he is ultimately more sympathetic to Russia's authoritarian oligarchic form of government than he is to American democracy. Whatever the reason, Congress must act now. Democrats must act. Republicans must act if we are serious about preserving American democracy. We must demand, and I know this is a radical idea, but demand that the President of the United States represent the interests of the American people and not Russia. Now, let us be as clear as we can be. Russia has been interfering not only in U.S. elections, but in the elections of other democracies, the United Kingdom, France, Germany. And I just want to reiterate, this really is not a democratic resolution. If there is any resolution that should be bipartisan, this is it. My Republican colleagues believe in democracy. I know that. We believe in democracy. And together, we and the American people must make it clear that we will not allow Russia or any other country on earth to undermine our democracy. And let us be very clear that Russia has not just been interfering in U.S. elections, but in elections of other democracies around the world, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, to name just a few countries. Russia's goal is to advance its own interest by weakening the transatlantic alliance of democracies that arose after World War II, while also inflaming internal divisions in our country as well as other countries. We should also be clear that this interference is directed from the very highest levels of the Russian government. Last week, Special Counsel Mueller announced a set of indictments of 12 members of Russia's military intelligence service, the GRU. There can be no doubt that given the nature of the Russian government, Vladimir Putin was directly involved in this effort. But our concern is not only what has already happened, more importantly, it is what could happen in the future. What happened in 2016 was an outrage, but we have got to make sure it does not happen in 2018 and future elections. Last week, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats, a former Republican U.S. Senator, raised the alarm on growing cyber attacks, threats against the United States in a range of areas, not just elections, including federal, state, and local government agencies, the military, business, and academia, saying the situation is at a quote-unquote critical point. Coates said Russia is, quote, the most aggressive foreign actor, no question, and they continue their efforts to undermine our democracy, end of quote. Coates compared the warning signs to those the United States faced ahead of the September 11th terrorist attacks. This is a clear and present threat to our democratic system and those of our allies. Ultimately, of course, we want a peaceful relationship with Russia. We do not want to return to the Cold War, and we surely do not seek any type of military conflict. But at the same time, we must be very clear that we oppose what Putin is doing, both in terms of his foreign policy and his domestic policy. On foreign policy, we will not accept Russian interfering in the elections of democratic countries, stoking political tensions by promoting hatred and suspicion of immigrants and minorities, and trying to undermine long-standing alliances between democratic allies. In 2014, in violation of international law, Russia invaded neighboring Ukraine and annexed the Crimea region. Russia has assassinated political opponents abroad, most recently through the use of poison in Salisbury, England. The British government concluded in that attack that it was most likely carried out by Russia's military intelligence service. Domestically, Putin has undermined democracy in Russia, crushing free speech, jailing political opponents, harassing and assassinating journalists who criticize him, and increasing persecution of ethnic and religious minorities. On Monday in Helsinki, President Trump had an opportunity to speak out on all of these things and more, to confront Putin about these destabilizing and inhumane policies. He chose not to. Well, and here is the main point, Mr. President. If for whatever reason the President of the United States is not going to do what is right, Congress must do it. Democrats must do it. Republicans must do it. The Congress must make it clear, and this is the resolution that I am introducing and asking for unanimous consent. The Congress must make it clear that we accept the assessment of our intelligence community with regard to Russian election interfering in our country and in other democracies. Does anybody doubt the truth of that? The Congress must move aggressively to protect our election system from interference by Russia or any foreign power. Does anybody deny the importance of that? The Congress must demand that the sanctions against Russia, as the Democratic leader mentioned, passing with 98 votes, be fully implemented, 98 votes on that issue. The Congress must make it clear that we will not accept any interference with the ongoing investigation of Special Counsel Mueller, such as the offer of preemptive pardons or the firing of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and that the President must cooperate with this investigation. Time and time again, I've heard Republicans, including leaders, make it clear that there should not be an interference in that investigation. Nothing new here on that point. And finally, Nothing new here either. The Congress must make it clear to President Trump that his job is to protect the values that millions of Americans struggled, fought, and died to defend: justice, democracy, and equality. That he is the President of the United States, and his job is to protect the interests of the American people, not Russia. Tweets, comments, and press conferences, and I know many of my Republican colleagues have been engaged in those activities. They are fine. They're constructive. But we need more from Republican senators. It is time for the Senate to rein in the president's dangerous behavior. If their leadership, Senator McConnell, will not allow votes on this extraordinarily important matter, then my Republican colleagues must join with Democrats to make it happen, or all of their fine-sounding words of concern become meaningless.
President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Trump derangement syndrome has officially come to the Senate. The hatred for the president is so intense that partisans would rather risk war than give diplomacy a chance. Does anybody remember that Ronald Reagan sat down with Gorbachev and we lessened the nuclear tensions? We need to still have those openings. Nobody is saying or excusing Russia's meddling in our elections. Absolutely. We should protect the integrity of our elections. But simply bringing the hatred of the president to the Senate floor in order to say, we're done with diplomacy, we're going to add more sanctions and more sanctions. You know what? I would rather that we still have open channels of discussion with the Russians. Kennedy, at the height of the Cold War, had a direct line to Khrushchev, and it may have prevented the end of the world. Should we be so crazy about partisanship that we now say, we don't want to talk to the Russians, we're not going to have relations with the Russians? We should stand firm and say, stay the hell out of our elections, but we should not stick our head in the ground and say we're not going to talk to them. I would like to see the Russians leave Ukraine. I think we could do it through diplomacy. We're not going to have it if we don't talk to them. I would like to see the Russians help more with North Korea, with denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We're not going to have it if we just simply heap more sanctions on and say we're not going to talk to the Russians, and anybody that talks to the Russians has committed treason. For goodness sakes, we have the former head of the CIA, John Brennan, gallivanting across TV, now being paid for his opinion, to call the president treasonous. This has got to stop. This is crazy hatred of the president. This is crazy partisanship that is driving this. For goodness sakes, we don't excuse Russia's behavior in our election, but we don't have to have war. We can still have engagement. We have engaged Russia throughout 70 years while also acknowledging the imperfections of their system, the parts of their system that we vehemently disagree with, the lack of freedom, the lack of human rights, and yet we had open channels of negotiation, open channels of communication. So I could not object more strongly to this. Mr. President, I object.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
The senator from Kentucky just told us he wants dialogue with Russia. He wants diplomacy with Russia, that he thinks it's important that we communicate with Russia. I agree. Who disagrees with that? There is not one word in this resolution that suggests that the United States of America should not aggressively engage in diplomacy with Russia to ease the tensions that exist between the two countries. What the senator said is totally irrelevant to what is in this resolution. What this resolution says is we're going to tell Russia, stop interfering in our elections. What this resolution is about is to tell Russia to stop interfering with democratic countries all over the world in their elections. What this resolution is about is saying that we should implement the sanctions overwhelmingly voted by Congress. What this resolution is about is that we will not accept interference with the ongoing investigation of Special Counsel Robert Mueller, and that what this resolution says is the president must cooperate with the investigation of Mr. Mueller. That's what this resolution is about. It has nothing to do with ending diplomacy with Russia at all. So that is just inaccurate, and I would hope that if not today, in the very near future, Republicans will join Democrats and do the right thing in our effort to preserve American democracy. Thank you, Mr. President.